Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome back to Watchbox and thanks for logging on. I'm Tim Mosso, he's Brian Govberg, and we are the team with a theme, and today's theme is pilot's watches. Brian, let's start with a quick wrist check and then jump to your first model.
So today I am wearing a Patek Philippe 5065. It is not set because I picked it up this morning, had a Zoom meeting right away, and I just didn't have a moment to do anything. So the 5065 is the long discontinued 38mm Aquanaut. It's got that black waffle dial, open case back. For me, the size is absolutely perfect. It's probably my most worn watch right now. The watch overall is in really nice shape. I love the fact that the straps on this particular reference is the same as modern era Luces, which allows me to consistently change the straps if I want. I've honestly have had it on the gray since I moved it off the black from the very beginning, but you know, there's that green that a lot of people put onto the reference, and then there's a bunch of different blues and different colors that I have that I just haven't switched to yet.
I really like the look of the dial on the strap. I know the idea was a sort of geosphere cut, but to me it looks like the surfacing of a grenade. It's an explosive look, and I love it.
Thank you.
All right, so which of these three pilot selections shall we start with?
So let's start with the Senator Navigator. So for me, visually, very much the look of a pilot's watch. You've got that matte black dial, you've got the hands and numerals that scream pilot, stainless steel case, a calf skinny brown leather strap. But when you get into the nuts and bolts of it, this movement is not traditional pilot's watch. So this is a Glashutte Original in-house perpetual calendar movement. You've got an aperture style display on the front that makes the watch itself, in my opinion, very easy to read. You have that big date window that's reminiscent of a lot of German watches, so two different discs. I think that big dates are they are one of my favorite complications. I think they're visually stunning on a watch, and it is itself a complication having that operate. Overall, the watch is very thin, I would say, relative to the IWC counterpart, but extremely wearable, 44mm. I tried it on a little bit earlier. I'm sure you'll do a quick wrist check on it. It fits more like a 42, which I think is important on a watch like this. But overall, just a really good watch from Glashutte, good value proposition for a perpetual calendar. And if you're looking for something that's not that dressy, that is that pilot's watch feel, but you want the insides to be more watch focused and complicated, this is that kind of watch.
Yeah, the great thing about this watch is, first of all, it was launched in 2008, so if you're wondering, it was the 2008 launch off the 2006 Senator Navigator collection. What this is going to give you that you don't really get from the IWC Big Pilot is a wearable size. As Brian mentioned, though it's a 44, don't blink. This wears just like a 42, so if you can wear a 42 steel round watch, you can wear this. That is not the case with the Big Pilot. Another thing that's lovable about this particular series is that it was always designed with more of a high horology orientation than the equivalent pilot's watches from IWC, and nowhere is that more evident than on the case back, where you have the twin mainspring barrel premium caliber 100, which is the upscale automatic over at Glashutte Original. It's nicely executed, and then it's modified with their own perpetual calendar system on the dial side. You still get that B-Uhr vintage instrument style look on the matte black dial, but you also get the perpetual calendar, so it's simultaneously a sports watch and high horology, and that's a rare combination. There is a flyback system for the seconds hand. Actually, there are apertures on the side, these little aperture adjusters. One of them is a flyback mechanism to zero out the seconds hand, and the lume is spectacular. Also fun because you don't get that display case back on the reverse side of the Big Pilot, so while both of them have extremely accomplished movements, only the Geo gives you the option of seeing that for which you've paid. Nice piece. Now, fun too, because we have another Senator Navigator on the table today, and that is the Senator Navigator B dial. There are two versions of this dial. Still 44mm, still stainless steel, still powered by the 55-hour automatic caliber 100 base. But what's different here is that the dial is reminiscent of the actual appearance of the famous Luftwaffe 1940 B-Uhr pilot's watch. Now what's also fun here is that there is a pusher adjuster built in that allows you to zero by flyback action, the seconds hand to synchronize. Now you can see this being the B dial, it has the minutes and seconds outboard and the hours inboard. And because it is a much thinner watch than the Big Pilot, you can see how this under 13 millimeters thick easily slides beneath the cuff. This is a real sporty watch. And unlike the IWC Big Pilot, it's wearable on actual human anatomy. 55-hour automatic, and you just saw the 100's a good-looking movement. This is a watch I like on every basis. Frankly, I think this is a timepiece that aces the Big Pilot in every regard except power reserve, which of course on the Big Pilot is 7 days. But a fun piece. Okay.
So, I mean, we might as well talk about the Big Pilot while we're on topic. So, one of the, I'd say, iconic watches coming from IWC, you have here the stainless steel Big Pilot. Any conversation about a pilot's watch should involve this watch. Overly large for me, too big for me to wear, but nevertheless should be a part of the conversation. What drew me to this watch, first off, was the rhodium dial, the highly luminescent hands and numbers, which, as far as the color scheme goes, hits it out of the park for me. You've got that, you know, black date disc down there, which fits in really nicely. It doesn't cause a stark contrast with the dial like a white date would, but so just, you know, really clean overall design. As far as this watch goes, the story of the father and son watch. So you had the father, which was the stainless steel Big Pilot, and then you had a son, which was from the Mark series. And they were sold together as a pair, the retail price obviously being the combination of both watches. And the fact of the matter is that the watches themselves never performed that well at the retail level because whoever was buying the watch generally either wanted the Big Pilot or they wanted the Mark series. So not that many were probably sold, but when they make it to the secondary market, they tend to do really well on an individual basis. A, because of this color scheme, B, because there's not that many out there, and C, because to me, this was the like pre-limited edition Big Pilot watch, right? Like there was always that traditional Big Pilot that was available for sale, and then there was this iteration that was around, but not, you know, not very often sold. And it was around before you started seeing tons of different dial configurations, case changes to different materials. So it was almost the special edition before the special editions. And again, I think that it's a really unique looking color scheme. It's a rare watch. And for me, has a special place, not only in the Big Pilot family, but that the Big Pilot family has a special place as far as pilot's watches go.
Yes, there was a Mark series, a 3255, that was the son in this set. This set was sold in 2012. There was a prior father and son set that was anchored by a 5004, the previous generation Big Pilot, and a Mark watch. The reason the second generation is more desirable is because the 2008 original father and son was a platinum set. So while the watches weren't limited then, and they weren't limited in this run, they were limited by circumstance and expense. So while not limited edition watches, as Brian noted, they were special edition watches. Now this watch is being sold by itself, which is how most folks like to have it. Of the two series, the steel that you see here is more popular, and of the two steel watch, it's the Big Pilot rather than the Mark that's the one everyone's out to get. A big reason for that is the rhodium dial, but also the more wearable steel case. Now it's enormous, although only 2.2 millimeters larger than the Senator Navigator on paper. Reality is that this watch wears at least 4 or 5 millimeters larger. It is a big watch. It's about 57 millimeters from lug to lug, which means this thing swallows your wrist whole. Now, while the lugs are nicely shaped, you're still talking about a very, very big watch. Of course, the original B-Uhr was 55 millimeters, so this is still a downscaled, more practical version of that Luftwaffe bruiser. Now the timepiece here, of course, is a 7-day power reserve IWC 50,000 series automatic. It is the world's largest automatic winder, so while you can't see it, it's in there.
Is that true?
That is true.
Oh, wow.
It is about 37 millimeters in diameter, which makes the movement in this watch bigger than a standard Rolex Datejust. It's also got the advantage of a screw-down crown and 60-meter water resistance, which I consider to be just threshold for using on the surface. I would swim with this on the surface on a more water-resistant band. I would not swim with the GO. Also important to note is that this watch features one of the most deluxe and extravagant straps you'll ever encounter on a pilot's watch. It's riveted together at the ends. It features a lot of leather, which you can see in profile, and it's alligator as the base rather than the more common calfskin. It has a big deployment clasp, and that is a good thing, because as heavy and expensive as this kind of watch is, you want more security than a pin buckle. And in case you wondered what key lime colored luminova looks like at night, it is an absolute circular supernova. So that is a fun piece.
So I'm going to give an opinion on something that IWC has done recently. I don't know if you saw, but so the older IWC Big Pilots used to come with the fish crown.
Yes.
And I'll have you explain that in a second. But they just re-released a new Big Pilot that features the fish crown. And for me, I wasn't a big fan of that move. I think that, having those fish crowns on the older pieces was esoteric, it was quirky, it was something that as you researched the models that you quickly realized they had replaced the fish crowns with the more modern era crowns over the years. So they became more and more scarce having that original crown. And it really did become something that consumers would either A, ask to keep if possible, or B, ask for the original crown back if it had to absolutely be replaced. And I just think that, I get that there's a lot of these nouveau vintage watches. There's watches that they're bringing back that are inspired by older pieces. But I just think that it was an unnecessary move to bring that back because it was a cool feature of the older watches that I personally thought could have been left in the past.
Yeah, I would agree. There was a period during the mid-2000s when IWC was transitioning away from its decades-old fish symbol on crowns, which meant water-resistant, but it was transitioning from the old fish symbol to the Probus Scafusia motto crown, and particularly on the Big Pilots, this had to do with a stem tube defect at the manufacturing point, but as with defective stamps, it turned out to be something everyone wanted to keep. So as in particular those older 5002s went in for service, they were coming back with the new Probus crown, and a lot of people were pissed off about that. So IWC, acknowledging the popularity of those early crowns, has started going not with a reissue watch, but a reissue component. And they've gone back to the fish-style crowns on the more recent versions of the Big Pilot. And again, I think I agree with Brian here. It's just too cute by half. I think the ones that should have those crowns are the originals. And in case you're wondering what I'm talking about, I think Andrew, he's now an ace with that focus right there. He's going to show you the Probus crown. You can see there's the IWC Probus Scafusia, which is the company motto, which basically means a good sound watch from Schaffhausen. And you could see that if this were the fish crown, it would have had, well, basically like a fish. And the timepiece has an enormous crown regardless. I've measured it. It's 10.9 millimeters in diameter. But I think the point here is that this is a little bit more authentic than some of the cutesy later fish crown revivals. It's also an explosive watch, as so few of the Big Pilots have been built with this mirror-like rhodium dial, which is very, very punchy in person.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that I had read that there was an issue over usage of the original image of the fish, so that they're now going to possibly use a different fish logo.
Yes.
Which to me, again, if you can't even use the original fish, why use a completely new fish on the crown now? I just wasn't. Again, it was as you said. I think it was a little too cute. Yeah. I think that the watch itself, I think, will do well. It makes for a cool story. It just, again, I thought it was something that didn't need to be done.
Yeah, I think there was some conflict with religious symbolism, and I think IWC, as with most watch brands, is thoroughly agnostic, especially considering the origin of that watch design was anything but angelic. So let's jump to an IWC of perhaps more modern genesis. Originally launched back in the early 1990s, this is the IWC 3711, the Doppel chronograph, the Flieger Doppel, the Richard Habring designed first-run split-second pilot's watch from IWC. Now this is a watch that was only made for 3 years, and it is a sensational piece, 42 millimeters in yellow gold with a black lacquer original tritium dial and matching day and date discs for the calendar in lush golden metallic. Turning the watch over onto its side, you can see that it is an explosively gorgeous piece. The successor model did not have the domed, almost bubble-like sapphire that the earlier examples did. This was achieved to give maximum clearance to the first generation variant of the split-second mechanism. Now, it's all built on a Valjoux 7750, which means that this is a timepiece that is absolutely tank-tough, reliable, and serviceable. But because it's also entirely intact from the lateral hallmarkings on the side of the case to the tritium of the dial. It is a wonderful historical document, with most of these having been built in stainless steel. Encountering a gold version, especially a gold version that's been minimally, if ever, polished, is a real treat. This is a hardcore IWC's collector piece, and as you can see, the split-second mechanism installed by Habring, who later went on to work at Lange and then, of course, Habring. It's just a brilliant system as he cuts the Valjoux 7750 in half down the middle, installs his mechanism, and puts it all back together, with IWC replacing the regulator, the power source, the drivetrain, and of course adding the split-second mechanism. This effectively becomes their movement. And if you want to take a look at what that original fish crown looked like, this watch has it. You can see it's completely intact. Not quite the easiest thing to see on yellow gold, but I believe we have the res now.
How awesome is that?
Is that fun or what? YouTube is not going to compress that to illegibility. I think you guys are going to get a good sense of what that little fish looked like. It is a very cool watch, and as you can see back then, IWC was all about solid case backs, with the result that this watch gets about another 2 ounces of gold built in. Now, if you're ever wondering why these pilot's watches from IWC all have those solid case backs, is because there's nothing to see. There's a soft iron cage in there that, like a Rolex Milgauss, provides a measure of anti-magnetic protection for the hairspring.
No, I mean, you know, as you mentioned, this particular watch in yellow gold, I'm sure was produced in, you know, very low quantities. If you're into older pilot's watches and precious metals, this is definitely one on the top of the list. You know, I'm a sucker for gilt black dials against yellow gold. I think it's a beautiful combination. There's a rich warmth to it. Even the day and date sub-dials have a warmth to it that matches the case, which is paired really nicely. It has that original fish crown still. Again, I think that if you're looking for a outside the box precious metal watch, that's a, call it, casual dress watch with, you know, again, we're talking pilot's watches here. These present a really good value because relative to what this watch would cost new now, again, if IWC was producing a all yellow gold watch of this caliber now, it would be tremendously more expensive than you can pick up these watches for in the secondary market.
Oh yeah, it would be over $30,000. It would be an
Correct.
absolute ton of cash. And the nice thing about this watch is, not only does it have its true to the period pre-1995 hallmarks, but the hallmarking on the side of the case, the first thing to get polished off or worn off. It is deep, it is sharp, it is absolutely as crisp as the day it left the assay office.
Yeah. I mean, this thing is great. And again, it even, as you had mentioned, it has the original crown there, which more than likely would have been produced in the past. So this watch overall, again, the case itself is still thick. I mean, it obviously has had very little intervention over the years.
The other nice thing is it's historically important. Before this watch, if you wanted to have a split-second chronograph, other than a few rudimentary systems from Dubé and Schaldenbrand, you were going to buy a bespoke piece from a high horology brand. These Rattrapant systems tended to be expensive, rare, delicate. Oftentimes, you would have to order one expressly and it would be made bespoke, which meant catastrophically expensive, not just expensive. So they were almost unheard of until IWC brought in the production-ready, everyday durable split-second system built on the 7750. And if you've ever seen one of the Habring Doppels, every single one of those builds on the technology that IWC introduced back in the early 90s with Richard Habring, and still continues to perfect and refine to this day.
I mean, 2 different finishes, high polish and matte. I mean, again, just a really nicely executed watch.
Super special. And again, the dial is a big part of the fun because it's real tritium. No photina here. It is the real deal.
That's the T there at the bottom.
That is correct. The T at the bottom and applique gold numerals not printed. A very special piece.
Okay. Oh, moving right along. So
a giant of the pilot's
no
watch.
pilot's watch conversation would be complete without a Breitling Navitimer. So the chronograph of the 50s, you have a logarithmic scale going around the circumference of the watch. Tim will be much better than I am at explaining exactly how to use that and what that means. This watch features the Breitling in-house caliber BR01 movement. Once Breitling came out with their own in-house chronograph movement, you saw a major transition into sapphire crystal case backs, which you have here on the watch. You know, a beautiful movement, very well made, very robust. Again, for me, this was done, their movement was designed and introduced at a time when Swatch had announced that there would be a major decrease in selling watches to the other brands. And it forced a lot of different brands to come out and to develop their own movements, and Breitling was one of the first movers to do that. I picked out what I think is one of the most traditional Navitimer looks. You have that black dial with the silver subdials, the pump pushers. Ideally, it would have been a slightly smaller version of the watch. This one's coming in at 43 millimeters, but again, still the overall look that I was going for. You probably see more Navitimers on a strap than you do a bracelet, but I was always a fan of Breitling's bracelets. They're extremely well made, very comfortable, and again, as I said, there's no pilot's watch conversation without the Navitimer in it.
Absolutely a fact. Breitling claims these came out in '52. I happen to believe the theory is that it came out in '54. The timepiece has always been a bit of a revolution because although a chronograph, and that's the focal point of the dial, it does have that circular slide rule logarithmic scale bezel. You can use it for multiplication and division, and if you look closely, you'll see different conversion factors and units that allow you to calculate supposedly everything you need to know for flight activities. Fundamentally, the multiplication and division capabilities mean you're going to be able to learn this thing and then beat your friends to the calculation of a tip at a restaurant while they fumble with their smartphones. It is very easy to learn. For example, if you want to divide, you simply put the number to be divided over the divisor, or the denominator, and then you look to the index at 10 and it will show you the answer. So it's a very quick system once you learn it. The nice thing about the Navitimer too is that it has its own bracelet. The 7-link design that you see here is not the pilot bracelet at Breitling. The 7-link design is expressly made for the Navitimers. Now, a few things that have set these watches apart since the arrival of Georges Kern: the display case back. Kern didn't create the B-01 movement. That was the old Schneider family ownership, but he did institute display casebacks across the board for watches.
I think I was saying B-01, which is a Bell & Ross, wasn't I?
That's okay.
You can correct me next time.
Your heart's in the right place. I know you don't like to be at
B-01.
And the nice thing about this movement is it wasn't designed to be seen, but it actually looks good. The B-01 was designed for the Chronomat back in 2009, and these days we get to see it, and it actually looks better than the equivalent Rolex, the 4130. The pusher feel on these movements is world-class. I compare it with Rolex and Lange as the best in the business. It's a 3-day power reserve, it's a COSC chronometer, stop seconds, quick set date, vertical clutch, and column wheel, and again, more Georges Kern design language. He's the CEO of Breitling since 2017. When you see tone-on-tone dials with silver registers and a black base, for example, he wants you to think in-house caliber. Breitling's also been getting a lot better with their clasps. Breitling clasps used to be something of an embarrassment. They're getting to the point now where I can almost compare them to what Rolex and Omega are doing, as there is an Easy Link-like system built into this clasp that allows you to adjust the length in increments. There are also divots drilled, so you can use your strap tool to change the anchoring point of the bracelet, and then you can use this little Easy Link-like micro adjustment to take in or take out a small amount of length based on your activity. Now throw it on the wrist, and though it's a 43, it only measures 43 at the bezel. At the base of the case, it's more like a 41, and it wears as such. What do I not love about the Navitimer? Well, it's not super water resistant, but in almost every other regard, this really is still the perfect pilot's watch. A backup, to be sure, in the era of flight computers, but what a nostalgic piece of, I'd say, aviation paraphernalia and history to showcase at the pilot's bar after the flight.
You know, and it's something that you pick up over time. Very few issues mechanically with the B-01 movements. You know, they rarely break. They're, you know, extremely efficient, and those that we do sell, you know, it's very rare when one would have to even come in for warranty service.
In the first couple of years, Breitling had some problems with them. They basically engaged in problem shooting for a couple of years, and now they offer warranties beyond 4 years on these, which is really industry standard. So they back it up. It's not just talking the talk. With the warranties, they do walk the walk.
They were one of the first ones, though, to initiate the longer warranty.
That's true. Back when everyone was doing 12 to 24 months, they were way ahead of the curve. And unfortunately, they're still way ahead of the curve because everyone has not instituted that. Now, if you take a look here, you can see how the slide rule works. So, let me find 90. You can see I've placed 90 over 30. So 90 divided by 30, you roll back to the index at 10, and that's how you do division with the slide rule. Now, you might have noticed that it doesn't keep track of the units for you, so you've got to move the decimal mentally, but that is how the system works, and it basically reverses in order to multiply. So it's a very cool system that is still very functional and very practical. I wouldn't necessarily send men to the moon with it anymore, but the slide rule still has a place. All right. And now This is a watch that, frankly, was a contemporary of the Navitimer, but we never group the Rolex GMT-Master and the Navitimer together in discussions.
Nobody would call this a pilot's watch.
You know, this watch was originally designed as a commission to Pan Am, the same way the Navitimer was designed as a commission for AOPA. A lot of folks don't recognize it as such because today pilot's watches tend to look more like, you know, the IWC B-Uhr or the Mark series. But that was the idea here, because the original GMT-Master was not a dual-time watch. That hour hands were coupled together, so one moved at half speed in 24-hour sweeps, and pilots everywhere would set their watch to Greenwich Mean Time, and then they would use the GMT offset of their destination in conjunction with the bidirectional bezel to temporarily find that second time zone, the time zone at their destination. So that was the original idea. Now back in 1983 we got the first GMT-Master 2, so you could have two separate time zones on the dial with the 12-hour and the 24-hour separately mobile. What we have here is a previous generation super case, 6-digit, two-tone GMT-Master 2. You can see the green GMT hand, the green GMT script, and the lovely warmth that comes with the combination of cold steel and yellow gold. I really do feel like this is a watch that encapsulates the best of summer in these waning days of summer. Rest assured, it is still the ultimate traveler's watch, water-resistant, chronometer certified, 2 time zones, and thanks to the ceramic cap on the bezel, very, very scratch-resistant. It is also a solid watch. Brian, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the solidity of Rolex bracelets and links and solid casebacks almost leads their steel gold watches to feel like full gold watches from other brands.
Yeah, I mean, you know, again, they've perfected that process over time. You know, the bracelets themselves stretch significantly less now than they would have done in the past. But as you said, they've got the manufacturing process down. And you know, one of the features about Rolex that I think can sometimes go unnoticed is that when they do make nuanced changes over time, they're always making changes for the better, whether it's to the case, to the bracelet, to the clasp, to the movement. And those small changes, even if it seems minor because it's not some new model or new dial, actually does make the watch more robust and better each time. And I think that that's something that if you start comparing watches of theirs from the past to now, you really get a good idea of what those changes are and how much for the better it is.
I think another thing that's worth mentioning, because we kind of live in the world of all watches all the time, and a lot of folks don't have that day in, day out experience, Rolex bracelets are otherworldly. When we're counterfeit busting, the first thing we look for if a watch is in doubt, a Rolex, it's the bracelet, because the aftermarket, the counterfeit market, folks who can otherwise ace a dial or a case cannot duplicate the solidity and integrity of a Rolex factory bracelet. That is always the giveaway, that is always the first thing we look for, and when we teach our folks how to spot them, we always talk about the bracelet, because while you can create the look of a Rolex, it's very difficult to create the feel of a Rolex, especially with bracelets and clasps. They kind of defy counterfeiting just by their sheer quality.
It's amazing to me that there was even a time when they weren't even solid center links.
Yeah, well, there was a time when Rolex thought of itself as more of a utilitarian implement maker, and I think it was slow to embrace its status as a totem of status during the 80s and 90s. I think they came around to it eventually, but they always saw Cellini sort of as the luxury watch,
right.
Or, you know, the Yachtmaster was the luxury watch, not the sub, and very gradually, especially in the 2000s, Rolex started to go with all solid center links, all solid end links, milled out clasps, things that just felt expensive. It's almost like the way Ferrari became the Ferrari of imagination during the 90s, the Ferrari of your dreams.
Right.
They were maybe a little bit more rustic in the 80s and 70s. By the 90s, Ferraris were what you imagined a Ferrari would be, and that's really the role Rolex assumed during the 2000s, and that's kind of where they sit right now.
And you know, I think that having the Breitling Navitimer and the Rolex GMT on the table, you know, it really shows you that as far as pilots' watches go, there is a utilitarian use to them when they were being produced for necessity, and they all don't have to fall within that super strict coded guideline of what a pilot's watch needs to look like. And you know, nowadays with, you know, a lot of you know, pilot's watch reinterpretations, or watches that have specific, you know, call it, or brands that have pilot's watch product lines, there's a certain look that they try and hit. And to me, the Glashutte is sort of that look. It's very much a pilot's watch look and feel with a more complicated movement in it. Both of these pieces here. But I think that having that history and usage is important to a brand. And while I didn't have one here, and I don't want to go off on a tangent on it, it was why I thought that it was a really good move that when Patek Philippe came out with their 5524G, I really thought that they did have a leg to stand on as far as having produced pilot's watches in the past, producing them in a more modern era. And even if it was, let's call it a white gold precious metal case, people would have wanted to do steel. I thought that it didn't have to just look like every other pilot's watch on the market.
And I'm totally behind that. There's probably no more diverse genre. If you think about it, a pilot's watch could be anything from a vintage Cartier Santos to a Breitling Aerospace Evo. So that's a pretty broad berth. Almost anything can be a pilot's watch in any form from any era.
I was looking for an emergency, but we didn't have one in the drawer.
Yeah, I know. You should have brought your Aerospace. This would have been the day for it.
Yeah.
All right, Brian, parting thoughts. If people want to reach out to us and talk about any of these watches or what they see on our website, how do they contact us?
So you can either email me directly at brian@govbergwatches.com. You can email social@thewatchbox.com. You can find either one of us on Instagram. Lots of different ways. If you work with a Watchbox or Govberg representative already, again, please feel free to reach out to them with any questions about any watches on the table. Again, as always, we read the comments. We care a lot about what you say. If you have any more ideas for this particular show, themes, we're here. We're happy to do it. And again, my name is Brian. This is Tim.
And I have to remind you, we're still giving away swag and watches on Instagram, so be sure to participate in Watchbox Trivia on time. That's my last plug, guys. Check us out on Instagram. Time out, Tim out, Brian out, and thanks for logging on.